And coming up on this week's Green Signals, Your Railway podcast, RAIB publishes an important update into the Talerddig rail crash, including some important new information. And what is going on at Northern Rail, and why is the performance so very bad? A week after the autumn budget, what have we learned about what it means for railways? The Welsh Highland Railway gets complaints from some nearby residents about acrid smoke from steam locomotives. And East West Rail, is it finally going to be electrified or not? Welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and
from me, Richard Bowker.
We have some breaking news from the RAIB, the Rail Accident Investigation Branch, in an important update in its investigation about the rail crash at Talerddig on October the 21st, in which there was one fatality and around a dozen injuries. At the time, it was widely understood and reported that one train, the eastbound train, was stationary at the time of the impact, and it was the westbound train that was moving, which passed the loop and should have stopped, and then went 800 to 900 metres beyond the loop to collide with a stationary train. We now know that both trains were moving, that the eastbound train was still at very low speed but had not actually stopped. But of far more import is that the revelation that the sanding equipment on the westbound train was not working. The driver had made a service application to slow his train on the approach to the loop, and then 40 seconds later made a full service emergency application, and that application remained in place until the point of collision. What that should have done was triggered an automatic release of sand on the rail to improve friction and adhesion, but that this didn't happen because the sandpipes have been revealed to be blocked. So we shall now wait for further information on a subsequent investigative report about the speed of the trains and the cause of the sanding blockage.
Now for this week's big story, and it's one that many of you have been getting in touch with over the last couple of weeks. Now we're recording this particular segment from the RAIB annual conference in London on Thursday, November the 7th, for a specific reason. We wanted to wait until the last possible moment to see if there was any movement in the story before committing it, and there has been, so we're glad we waited. Last week we mentioned the issues that were unfolding at Northern and said we'd do some digging. All right, Richard?
Yep.
Though it turns out it's a bit more complicated, as ever, than that. So here's a quick run through history, although some of this is summarised to save time. At privatisation, Regional Railways North West became one franchise, First North Western, and Regional Railways North East became another, Arriva Trains Northern, and both operated from 1997 to 2004. The Strategic Rail Authority subsequently announced it planned to reorganise the Regional Railways North West and Regional Railways North East franchise with a Transpennine Express franchise to be created for the long-distance regional services, with the remaining services to be operated by a new Northern Rail franchise. And in due course, on July the 1st, 2004, the SRA awarded the Northern franchise to Serco Ned Railways. It was for 6 years and 9 months, with a 2-year extension subject to performance targets being achieved. Although for various reasons the services operated by First North Western and Arriva Trains Northern did not actually transfer to Northern until the December the 12th, 2004. Quite a story. In May 2010, the DFT confirmed that Northern had met the performance targets and the franchise was extended for 2 years until September 2013. Further extensions followed, and eventually, in December 2015, it was announced that Arriva, trading as Arriva Rail North, had been awarded a new franchise to run from April the 1st, 2016 through to March 2025. Sadly, it wasn't to last. Following a drawn-out period of disagreement and he said, she said, the Secretary of State at the time, Grant Shapps, announced in January 2020 the franchise would be removed from Arriva and taken over by the government operator of last resort in March 2020, and that's what happened. Blimey, Richard. I'm glad you didn't ask me to learn that. That really is quite the history, and that's only a summary. Plus, I see the SRA is mentioned, so actually, if we cut it short, it's probably your fault.
Of course. No, I accept that. You're probably guilty as charged. Actually, interestingly, the end of the franchise in 2020 was also mired in controversy. I don't know if you remember at the time, we had Arriva complaining about things that hadn't been delivered. There was some infrastructure which they said had been promised that didn't arrive. Remember platform 15 and 16 at Piccadilly? I think that was one of them. And then also they said, Network Rail had actually given them a timetable that was in effect inoperable. It just didn't really work. So I think Arriva was saying at the time, look, yeah, okay, but we couldn't do it anyway because of factors outside of our control. It's all a history, but why does it matter? Well, it matters partly because for the last 4.5 years, we've effectively had a franchise that's been operated in the public sector. Yes, it's operated of last resort, but unfortunately, it means that it's still got sort of similar obligations and responsibilities that other franchises have got. And second, but
it's publicly owned.
But it's publicly owned. And second, probably more important, because of that history you just outlined, it's ended up being a bit of a smorgasbord of different terms. You like that word, right?
That's smorgasbord.
Of different terms and conditions over time. So First North Western and Arriva Northern, back in the early days of privatisation, pursued somewhat different strategies towards people resources. Why is that important? It means that today the issues are not distributed evenly across the whole company. So these don't travel notices, which we've had a lot of over Sundays, for not having enough train crew, they probably impact the Northwest more than they do other areas for reasons we can explain. But it has been a complicated story.
And that's presumably why Mayor Andy Burnham is more vocal than perhaps some of the other mayors like Tracy Brabin in Bradford on the east of the Pennines. And is this why it's come to a head now? And if so, what's the resolution? If nothing else, it shows that the public sector operations in itself is not a panacea for fixing anything and everything. And if it's down to not having enough staff, that's not something you can fix overnight.
No.
But the public owners have had 4.5 years to fix it.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the sort of slight challenges of this, isn't it? Your point about Andy Burnham's absolutely right. He's taken something of a leadership role in this. But because the issues, for instance, of rest day working on drivers are kind of across the whole of the company, of other mayors are affected as well. So, Tracy Brabin has been involved in this, but Andy's taken a pretty leading role. Now, there is a very interesting paper which we'll put on the website, which you can have a look at. There was a meeting of something called the Rail North Committee of Transport for North. That was on the 30th of October. Not only can you read the paper, which does set out in more detail where the distribution of the cancellations and the problems are, but also you can watch the webinar.
And that's the one that Andy Burnham chairs.
And that's the one that Andy Burnham chairs, but Tracy Brabin was on that as well, for example. It is worth watching the webinar. They are, the mayors are, all the elected officials are, they're courteous, they're professional, but they're tough. And actually I have to say, rightly so. One of the issues that the paper discusses, and which was on the webinar, was that because Sunday has not been included in the contracts for conductors in the Northwest, and there's been no rest day working agreement for drivers, but you think about the conductors thing, it means that to get staff to work a train service on a Sunday, you're in effect asking them to volunteer for work.
To do it, yeah.
So there's 2,200 trains, I think, run on a weekday, 1,500 on a Sunday. That's where the problem has been. So, Andy's got involved because he's obviously concerned about it as the mayor of Greater Manchester. I think he also has a vision of getting more involved in he does get involved in specification of rail services. He does indeed. But nonetheless, it's something which obviously has caused passengers and businesses a real problem.
Which has a very big and direct effect on the local regional economy, doesn't
it?
But there is good news, I understand, that a deal has been done.
Yes, so a deal's been done on driver rest day working across the whole of Northern for 3 years. Okay.
So there's a consistent plan in place for at least 3 years.
Yeah, they've got a rest day working.
And that's the first time, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is the first that they've now replaced what they didn't have. So that's good. It still leaves the conductors issue to tackle in the northwest. I think it's right that conductors in Yorkshire and the northeast, actually, most of them do have Sundays in their contracts. There's the point about different franchises in
either
history.
side of the Pennines.
But you still got to sort out the conductors in the northwest. But at least it's a start. It's a good start, and I suspect, well done in a way, Andy Burnham and Tracy Brabin and others for kind of going, do you know what, this has got to get fixed.
And as you said, it's a start. It's like the old one about eating an elephant, isn't it? A slice at a time.
Yeah, but it's a big step forward.
It absolutely is. And we'll come back to this as it develops, and hopefully, let's hope it develops in a positive direction, especially for the passengers and the staff, of course, who have a fairly miserable time of it.
Yeah, no, it'll be, there's more to come.
As they used to say on both Monty Python and Blue Peter in days gone by, and now for something completely different. Brought to our attention by green signaller Anthony Thomas. There's an extraordinary story appearing in the news this week about the Welsh Highland Railway. Very well run, but residents living on, here we are, pronunciation tripwire of the week, Res Segon Tiwm, which I am sure is going to be wrong. Stop smiling, Richard.
Well, I'm just glad you had a go, because there was no way I was risking that.
In Carnarvon, Gwynedd have apparently raised concerns about thick, acrid smoke from the steam trains, saying it's making them ill. The street in question is 20 feet, 6 metres above the Welsh Highland Railway's local station. According to news reports on this story, residents have said there never used to be a problem, but there is now, because the railway is no longer able to use Welsh coal and is instead importing it from other countries. Now, I don't know what sort of coal they are using, but just a couple of sentences about coal. People tend to think that coal is coal is coal, and it certainly isn't. Welsh coal, and it all comes down to what the coal is made up of. And I'm going to share a little, is it an acronym? What do they call it? Where there's to remind you what it is. As a young trainee fireman, I was told, because a question in the exams are, what is coal composed of? And I was given the expression, no cash. So you could probably guess what the composition of coal is from that yourself. It's nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, ash, sulfur, and hydrogen. And it comes in various combinations. And that is what gives coal its different characteristics. Welsh coal is quite soft, which is why the Great Western Railway never had mechanical equipment like the big cenotaph towers. It would have pulverised it to dust. They just had those trolley things that they could tip into the tenders, whereas the LNER and the LMS had big cenotaph coaling towers for mechanical handling, because it was much harder. I was trained on Rossington washed cobbles from Doncaster, which was very hard. It starts to burn immediately. You put it on the fire, whereas Welsh coal takes a good 5 or 10 minutes to get going. So a fireman has to adjust when he puts the coal on the fire, requiring the heat. And of course, with the end of coal production in this country, and indeed in Wales, it would seem, it comes from all over the place. It costs about 500 quid a tonne now, so it's not cheap stuff. A lot comes from Colombia, some from Poland and Russia, I've heard it said. And depending on what sort of coal it is and its chemical composition, remember, no cash, depends on its burning characteristics and the smoke, and of course the skill of the fireman in balancing the air that's coming up through the grate with the air that's going in through the fire hole door and mixing with the flames, because you can manipulate the amount of smoke you get. So it's all about that. And Paul Lewin is an expert engine man who runs the Welsh Highland and will be on the case, I'm sure. And maybe we should try and get him on, because it is an interesting sort of question. Is there a certain coal he's had to buy that now should be avoided? I don't know, but those are the questions. Coal is not coal is not coal. It comes in many different shapes and sizes.
It's fascinating. I suspect the one place we're not getting it from at the moment, or at least I hope we're not, is Russia, obviously. But in terms of, I had no idea, right? So that's every day's a school day. Nigel.
Yep.
We have actually asked if we could speak to the Welsh Highland Railway. I think they're actually sort of at the cusp of end of season stuff. So we've not been able to do that yet, but we will do that. It is fascinating. I mean, when I first saw that story, I thought, oh, for heaven's sakes, it's a railway. It's always been a railway. And of course it hasn't. It closed and now they've reopened it. I mean, quite a while ago. I mean, it's what, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
But this change in coal, it's an issue. It can't be ignored. You've got to look after your local stakeholders. So if there's one person who will take that really seriously, it's Paul Lewin. So that's good. But we'll come back to the story as the hopefully the clouds of smoke clear, and we can learn a bit more. So
and
there
he will be able to speak expertly about it. But that's why
Oh,
the
yeah.
Great Western never had coaling plants. Welsh coal.
I had no idea. There you go.
Too soft.
Green signals.
There you go.
Bringing it all to life. Now, talking of exciting things and bringing things to life, we need to talk about what we were up to yesterday. Now, so you're listening to this on Thursday the 7th, but on Monday the 4th, we did something that was very special. Now, for those who haven't seen it on social media yesterday, what we did was join GB Railfreight for the naming of a Class 66, number 66312, which they named Nigel Harris. How was that?
I'm still trying to get my head around it, Richard. It was surreal. It was an incredible honour. I mean, as I said yesterday, when I was a kid and first came across locomotives, and particularly named ones, always had sort of a bit of a special edge, didn't they? They were named after, I don't know, warships and admirals and colonies in the far-flung part of the empire, or famous British figures. So the idea of joining that group was I mean, it is incredibly humbling. John Smith, the managing director of GB Railfreight, announced it out of the blue, completely could have knocked me down with a feather, during my last National Rail Awards after 24 years in September 2023. And it's taken that time to arrange it, but it was incredibly moving. There was, you and Steph were there, which meant a lot to me, as well as a panoply, which is another good word, of faces from across the industry who took the time out to come and watch me unveil the thing and say a few words, and then adjourn to the Betjeman for some beer and nibbles. And it's probably the greatest honour I've ever been sort of afforded, short of the letter from the palace as New Year's honours approaches. I can't think of anything else which would be bigger. To have a locomotive named after you is, I'm still trying to get my head around it. It meant an enormous amount.
It looked fantastic, and as you say, it's taken a while to put together. And one of the reasons it's taken a while to put together is really quite complicated. So Steph and I were chatting with GB Railfreight's head of timetabling, an incredibly impressive individual called Tom Mainprize. And when we were doing the planning for it, we thought it would be fun to do a bit of a film of the whole process, right? Not just you pulling the cord, but everything that happened to lead up to that point. So we are pulling together a little video of how to plan and execute a naming, and I think everybody will find it quite interesting. We haven't quite finished that yet because we're still waiting for a bit of the footage to come through. So we will do that hopefully next week. But in the meantime, we thought we'd embarrass Nigel with a little clip from the naming ceremony itself. So here it is.
And I'm particularly touched and pleased that it's a freight engine. Next year is the 200th anniversary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, which, although had some passenger traffic, its birth was for coal.
It was.
And it was a freight railway. And I love the idea that, as I have got a loco with my name on it, that it's a freight engine. That somehow seems entirely appropriate. And that's about it, really. Thanks ever so much again for all of you for coming. And we just need to get on with it now, I suppose,
do.
John.
I will take the microphone off you after 3. Ready, chap? 1, 2, 3, go! Woo!
And it was an amazing occasion. I was just sorry my old mum wasn't there to see it. She would have been absolutely beside herself with with pride. But I mean, the Mickey taking has already started, Richard. As we've been talking today, I noticed that Pip Dunn has tweeted, "Well, I see you're off to North Walsham today to collect a trainload of sludge."
That's excellent. No, there were a few other cracks like, gosh, I never knew that's how you spelt grumpy old bloke. But there you go. So no, there was it was a wonderful occasion, and so well done you. That was great.
If I lean to one side, you can maybe see that a small replica of the nameplate is already in pride of place on my filing cabinet behind me there. So, but I say it was really good to have you and Steph there. So thanks for coming and shooting the video. And Steph came up with a fantastic guest list, which I had no idea.
It was very good.
She refused to let me see it, so I had no idea who was going to be there until it seemed that I knew everybody on King's Cross Station yesterday, which was a really, really special day. And can I also just say, thanks to all the people on Twitter. I've tried to thank a few of them who've put some lovely comments on Twitter. I'm sure they won't all be lovely, but the ones there up to now are. And so thank you to all of you who's done that, because I'll try to reply to them all. But as you know, with the YouTube things, Richard, they come in such volume, it's not always easy to keep up. But it was a very, very special day.
Right, that's your moment of sun. Right, moving on.
Let's carry on to something else that we're still trying to understand the full picture of. And that is the budget. Richard, you've had time to ponder, and you're so good with numbers and details. Are you still of the same view that you were, that we're not that thrilled with it?
It's a really good question. I have pondered it a lot. I'm sure there isn't a person in the country who's kind of even remotely interested in how things work, what things cost, their own personal finances, who hasn't done the same thing. So I'm not trying to pretend I've been sat there in splendid isolation. Everybody will have been doing the same thing. I sort of split it into two things, and we've got to be careful. This is not a political podcast, so we'll resist the urge. But I think because this affects everybody, it's worth a comment.
And railways is all about politics anyway. You can't avoid it. They're inextricably linked.
I couldn't agree more.
So discussing the politics is not the same as expressing a political view.
On the railway point of view, there's not really a lot more to add that we talked about. They always say, don't they, the devil's in the detail. I was looking at the funding for rail public transport active travel section, and there's an additional £200 million for city region sustainable transport settlements. I mean, talk about an acrid, and that brings the total amount of money to metro mayors up to 1.3 billion in 25-26. That's a lot of money. There's over 650 million for local transport beyond those city regional transport settlements, which improves transport connections in towns, villages, rural areas. Now, why do I mention that? It's because you might have seen a lot in the press of, this particular service or this, I think our friends at the Independent Bridge Line Rail Group were talking about, they'd seen something relating to Grimsby and Cleethorpes. And I guess that's all in that. It's kind of down in the detail. So there's stuff happening there. But when you look at the big stuff is really what we knew, and a lot of it's already been announced,
and indeed built.
In some cases built, I think the thing that we still think was the good thing that came out of it was tunnels to Euston, right? Now, exactly what that precisely means is still not entirely clear. This is the government after all. But certainly those tunnel boring machines are going to start digging holes, and that is clearly, a good thing. So that is good. I do think that one of the reasons why we're kind of going, well, yeah, it wasn't so bad, was because we did fear it might be worse.
Yes.
And you look at the, not over the last maybe week or so, but you look over the last few months, the mood music, if I can call it that, cancelling, restoring your railways. Not that I had a particular problem with that specifically, but, there was a little bit of, is rail going to get a bit of a kicking? And because it didn't really, I suppose we all went, oh, well, maybe that's not so bad. But that's where I get to on rail. I'll move on to the wider budget in a minute. But I mean, you got the same view. That's how it feels to me. It's not brilliant. The spending review is critical, but at least it's not as bad as it possibly could have been.
But that's a classic government technique, isn't it? The leak that road tax is going to go up by 25 quid, and when it only goes up by 10, we think we've been done a favour.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, yeah, absolutely. It's expectations management. Now, as to the wider budget, and this is a bit where I possibly wander off a little bit, and this is a personal opinion, which we're allowed to have, right?
We are.
I think it's a fairly awful budget, right? And why do I say that? I was trying to imagine an analogy, and the best one I can kind of come up with is sort of Rachel Reeves. She's the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of UK PLC, right? She's responsible for the budget of the country, okay? And what she basically stood up and said, I'm going to significantly increase operational OPEX, right? I'm going to put a load more money into day-to-day spending. I'm going to give a fairly chunky pay rise to some people, but not all of them. I'm going to leverage the balance sheet with loads more borrowing.
Do you want to just say briefly what that leverage means in that circumstance?
We're just going to basically take a load more borrowing onto the company's balance sheet, which we'll have to pay back in the future. That's leverage, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to deliver 1% or 1.5% growth, right? So in return for all of that, I'm going to deliver 1 to 1.5% growth. If that was a CFO doing that to the annual general meeting of the shareholders, she'd be out. You know, it's just, and that's the problem, really. It's like a heck of a lot of spending for not an awful lot, right? And I think the problem is, you know, with everything like national insurance and with issues around the cost burden that's being placed on small businesses, I'm worried that the government don't really understand how business works. And remember, because none of them in the House of Commons really, I mean, certainly the vast majority of them never actually run
anything,
a business, right? And I think there's an element of they don't really know. And so, you know, it's all very well to have the biggest cheer was probably a penny off a pint of beer. I don't think they really quite get it. So that is my concern. You know, governments don't create wealth, right? Businesses create wealth. People create wealth. The government then just spend taxpayers' money on things that they believe it's important for society to have. So I'm not knocking that.
That's fair enough.
But they don't create wealth. And that's my worry from this budget. It's an awful lot of cash going in for not a lot coming out.
And they think we're stupid, don't we? I mean, this dancing around, how many angels can get on a pinhead, dancing around the reality of, well, no, we're not putting taxes up for working people because it's national insurance for employers. Well, for God's sake, you know, if employers are paying more, they're going to have fewer jobs and they're going to be able to give fewer pay rises, aren't they? So it does impact working people massively. Do they think we are so stupid we don't get that?
I don't know. I think they will be. I think she will be quite surprised at the reaction, because although I thought it was quite an assured and confident performance, and we said that last week, and I wouldn't change my view on that, there was a certain self-satisfaction in it as well, that it was like, oh, I've nailed it.
Yeah,
I've nailed it. And then in the following days, it kind of unraveled a bit. Now, in the end, this spending review is going to be really critical as to, and I kind of reserve a bit of judgment, because if the capital gets invested in things that will generally enable people and businesses to create wealth, then that's a positive thing. But so maybe we should just, hold a bit of judgment. But as a budget, I still think my analogies is fair. Yeah. Loads more cash spent, loads more borrowing for basically
1%.
Bog all. So there you go. The world of economics, according to me. I'm sure everybody will have one of the fascinating things, Nigel, is when you look at the budget commentary, it's like everything now. You've got a bunch of people over on one side of the divide saying it was marvellous, absolutely marvellous, finally getting a grip, fixing the foundations, whatever it is. And then on the other hand, you got a load of people saying that was the worst thing we've ever heard. There's not a lot of, not too sure, but we'll have to wait and see.
Asquith's big thing, wasn't it? Wait and see. And we will return to it in due course. Anyway, Shall we move on?
I think we should.
It's now time to thank everyone who has left us a super thanks on YouTube this week, and you all are Howard Jones, Alan Kirkman, Michael Stocking, the Independent Brigline Rail Group, Graham Webster, Paul Roberts, Chris Exley, Alan A.R. Pollock, and Ron Davies. And thanks ever so much to all of you for ticking that box. It's all much appreciated by Steph and Richard and myself.
Certainly is. And thank you also to our new and gold and silver members, who are Russell Shepherd, Benny the Brit, John W., Piers Croft, and Richard King. And you can see all our members, to whom we're very grateful, in the end credits of the show. If you're a gold or silver member, please do drop us a line to info@greensignals.org with your postal address so we can send your exclusive goodies, which you get as part of your membership. And thank you to the dozens that have already done so. We will answer everyone. We're working through them. Really do appreciate you doing that. It makes our life a lot easier.
And we're always working on the idea of new goodies, aren't we? Although this show will always remain free. One of the other things you get as a silver or gold member is access to exclusive video content, the latest new aspect of which is a rather lovely little film that Richard made of the Talylln Railway. He shot that earlier in the year en route to Port Maddock when we were both heading for the Snowdonian, and which is released to members over the weekend. And it is very pleasant because the Talylln exudes charm like no other, and Richard really captured that in this nice little film. So we thought we'd whet your appetite with this little clip. Enjoy.
The line is constructed to the gauge of 2 foot 3 inches, whereas the Festiniog is 1 foot 11.5 inches. The Act of Parliament specifically stated that the railway may be built at any gauge, provided it was not more than 4 foot 8.5 inches and not less than 2 foot. After buying the railway in 1911, Sir Henry Haydn-Jones never expended the capital that it really needed, and following his death in July 1950, it seemed for a while the railway would be closed, and anything worth salvaging being ripped up and sold for scrap. Curiously, the railway had not been included in the Great Railway Nationalisation, as presumably the powers that be in London thought it was already closed. And so when Tom Rolt, David Kerwin and Bill Trinder, amongst others, formed a railway society in 1950 with the sole purpose of preserving and operating the line, they were able to enter into an agreement with Lady Haydn-Jones to lease the line from the estate. The railway reopened under the control of the society for the first time on the Whit Monday bank holiday, 14th of May 1951, and in so doing became the first preserved heritage railway line in the world. It's good, that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it is a nice little film.
It is. Yeah, little apology. I mean, I shot most of that on GoPro.
Fine.
And my phone. So if you're wondering quite, if it looks kind of moody and all the rest of it, it's just because it's not quite what we do now. But it's lovely. And everybody was very happy, and I really enjoyed it. The weather wasn't great, but I think that
somehow adds to it, Richard.
I agree. Those Welsh valleys in the rain, they're amazing.
And of course, ground zero for heritage railways, not just in this country, but the world.
And I would just say, I mentioned it in the film, which of course members saw all of it. But I mentioned this again. It is worth reading that book, Railway Adventure by LTC Rolt, Tom Rolt. It's a cracking read. It's of its time. It's 19 whenever he wrote it in the 50s.
1551.
But it's a really super read. I read it as a boy, and I've reread it many times.
Funny enough, Rolt's written 2 books, which I've read many times. That, and of course, the classic Red for Danger.
Red for Danger, yeah.
But what I love about Railway Adventure is he's a good writer, was Rolt. He was a gifted man in many ways.
Yeah.
But he was a lovely writer, and what he captures is that fantastic atmosphere of gentlemen enthusiasts in sports jackets and flannels, puffing on their pipes and steaming up engines and running a railway and hoping they might find the odd sleeper between the rails every now and then. It really
Absolutely.
captures all
No,
that.
it's wonderful stuff. He wrote a third book, of course, which is
Read that
close
as well.
to your mouth, which is Narrowboat, which is about, because he's probably the father, along with a guy called Robert Aikman of the Inland Waterways Association.
Well, he was.
We owe him a great deal.
And of course, he on my bit of the River Soar, he spent quite a bit of time around Barrow-on-Soar and loved it there.
He did. Shall we move on to this week's Railway News Roundup?
After that rather lyrical little chat. Yes, let's
do it. It was a little lyrical, wasn't it? Anyway, here's one that plenty of people have been waiting to hear about for a long time. Though I've got some reservations, which we'll come to. East West Rail have announced plans for electrification. Hurrah!
Hooray!
Yeah. And it is excellent news on the face of it. They've announced a 10-week non-statutory consultation from November the 14th to January 24th, 2025, obviously, to give communities along the route the opportunity to have their say on the plans. Now for the bit that I'm really not sure about, which I think could be actually a bit mad, really.
I agree.
EWR's preference would appear to be for discontinuous electrification. If you're not sure what that means, it can take a number of forms, but listen to our interview with Neil Drury, also available on the site, where we talk about that on the South Western Railway, where actually I think it makes probably a lot of sense. However, on East West Rail, they're talking about hybrid battery electric trains. They say the reason for this is that overhead lines would therefore only need to be installed on part of the route. That saves cost. It's less disrupted during disruption. They talk about it's not as visually intrusive.
What nonsense that is.
But here's the point. This is a line that links Oxford, Milton Keynes, Bedford and Cambridge. This is not a secondary route. This is potentially an important trunk route. And if you have discontinuous electrification, if the wires aren't available the whole way, then things like freight, for instance, could be prevented from using the route because, it doesn't work quite so well. And we know that, overhead electrification for freight is a very, very good thing. So I think that's a real issue. It's almost as if they're thinking about the line in isolation rather than as part of a network and I've said strategic, there you go, as part of a strategic network at that. So hopefully in the consultation, people will have their say.
But at least they are talking about electrification, Richard. Let's not forget, this was the route that bloody Grant Shapps rejected electrification on the basis that technology would overtake electrification. We'll go past that.
Shapps or Grayling? I think they both had a stake
in that. It was Shapps who said about, I'm certain it was Shapps, I'm fairly confident it was Shapps who said about technology will overtake it.
That's true. I think it was Grayling that kicked the electrification into the touch in the first place.
Well, that's because he'd been so badly burned by the GWEP, by the Great Western. Thousands of tons of steel.
They both got it wrong. We know
they
that.
Absolutely did get it wrong.
Right. There we go.
Right. So another electrification story here, Richard. The East Kilbride to Glasgow line will be closed for 16 weeks from January 2025 for a £140 million electrification upgrade. Good old Scotland. The plan is that from December 25, the line will be electrified. There'll be a new station at East Kilbride, a new 2-platform station with an accessible footbridge at Haremyres, is that? Along with further upgrades to stations on this route. The one thing I think Scotland do not get right is they build the ugliest new stations ever invented. If you look at them on the Waverley route, I realise I'm going to invite criticism for that, but they are horrible.
Well, I'm not going to say a word. I'm going to move swiftly on, except to say I think this is great. This is exactly where electrification is a really good thing, and they've taken a blockade, which I also think is the right approach. So yeah, Scotland showing us how it's done in that regard. Got a sad story now, Nigel. This was sent to us by Peter Muggeridge and others, and it's the news that Chris Hillyard, the foreman of the Royal Train for 33 years, he died of cancer at the age of 67 on October the 19th. Now, Chris was involved in the maintenance of the Royal Train from 96 to 2010 as its manager. He made 794 trips with Queen Elizabeth II and other senior royals. Now, according to his obituary, he left school at 16. He joined British Rail's Wolverton Works near Bletchley before joining the team that maintained the Royal Train 4 years later. He was eventually made redundant in 2010 by the German company, as we know, that was then operating the train, but not after many years of dedicated service. There was a lovely obituary to him in the Telegraph with some great little anecdotes about his encounters with the late Queen. One I particularly love was the first time he met her. He was apparently trying to deal with a radio communications fault en route from Aberdeen to King's Cross after the Queen and Prince Philip had gone to bed for the night. And as he was creeping his way quietly through the lounge, navigating the multiple corgis, he accidentally disturbed one, and it woke the Queen, who appeared in the corridor in her curlers and nightdress. She apparently was very understanding. It's a lovely story, and a great man. And yeah,
I knew Chris quite well, and he was a lovely man. He told me that story, and he said he was stood in a position like people who've ever played that Twister game might remember. He was sort of striding over the corgis on one leg, and the Queen then appeared. Just one little anecdote about Chris. He very kindly arranged for the rail team to pay a visit to Wolverton. He took us all through the train, so we all saw the whole train. And at the end of that meeting, cut the long story short, over coffee, I said, have you ever had steam on the train? Oh, we couldn't get an operator who could keep the mouth shut and keep it confidential. I said, well, if I could find somebody, would you be interested? I put him in touch with Brell Hewitt, and the first appearance of Duchess of Sutherland on the North Wales coast followed. Tremendously successful. And Chris said, Nigel said it was brilliant. He said, if we hadn't have had coffee that day, it never would have happened. He said, but we were at crew in the platform, paused, and he said, the quickest way to get from one end of the train to the other, it was all closed off, was to walk briskly down the platform. As I got to the Queen's carriage, they have inward opening doors. I was aware that there was a door open, and the Queen was stood there. And he said, is everything all right, ma'am? Everything all right, Your Majesty? Is there a problem? Oh, no, she said, I just absolutely love steam trains. Isn't this wonderful? And I thought, well, that was a nice story. But Chris was a big Rolling Stones fan, was Chris as well. So
there you go.
He was a lovely bloke, and unfortunate the way he was made redundant, because he did a brilliant, and he lived that royal train. It was absolutely in his DNA. So R.I.P. Chris, and thanks.
Indeed.
And that is the news for this week. If you'd like to send us any big news, little news, anywhere in the country, do let us know. And if we use your email, we'll give you a name check.
Absolutely. Which means it's time to do the quiz.
Here we go. I'm running.
See, I don't even get a cheeky comment now. I just get like a kind of a sort of a little giggle, sort of funny noise. But anyway, okay.
Well, I'm wary about going a bit farther each week and finally saying far too much. But anyway, look, I'm sure you've done a brilliant job as ever, Richard. Roll with it.
Thank you very much. Right. Anyway, so if you remember, the last week's question had been sent to us by
Ian Stewart.
Ian Stewart, former chair of the Transport Select Committee and a guest at your loco naming. He's on terrific form. And the question was this: how can you travel from Burnley, your place, to Blackburn, finer place, through Box Hill without changing trains? And I told a little story about Box Hill, tunnel at Box Hill, which of course isn't Box Hill Tunnel. I think it's actually called Box Tunnel, which was quite deliberate. I was trying to be sneaky and throw people off the scent. I know. It didn't make any difference because loads of you got the question right. And the answer to the question was, you'd have to be in Melbourne, Australia,
I didn't know that.
On the Lilydale or the Belgrave line, which I think goes from Flinders Street, and it goes through Burnley.
I didn't know that.
To Blackburn. I think there's a Croydon as well. But
is there an Oswald Twistle and a Rishton?
No, there is only one Oswald Twistle, trust me. But from Burnley to Blackburn, you go through Box Hill on the Lilydale line. So that was the correct answer. Dozens got it, literally dozens. Well done. And the winner is Phil Bancroft. So well done, Phil. If you send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org, we will get your mug on its way to you. So well done, Phil. Great question. Thank you, Ian. And so to this week's quiz. So here it is. Why would I see arrowroot, bilberry and hazel together in a railway setting? So the question is, why would I see, or where would I see arrowroot, bilberry and hazel together in a railway setting? If you think you know the answer to that, quiz at greensignals.org by midday on Saturday, the 9th of November, I'm guessing, after which we'll put all the correct answers into the digital hat and draw one out at random. And that is the quiz.
As per usual, I don't even understand the question, let alone the answer, but I look forward to being educated in due course. Anyway, here's a nice little story to end on, Richard. To celebrate its 50th birthday, I can't believe this, I remember it being founded in 2025, the National Railway Museum, founded in 1975, is asking the public to send photographs of their visits to the NRM through the years. The NRM 50 campaign will share images of the public's personal connections with the museum. So if you've got any nostalgic snaps from your visit to the museum, you should email them to 50years@railwaymuseum.org.uk. That's 50 years at railwaymuseum.org.uk by Friday, November the 15th. Photographs must include at least one person and permission granted from both the photographer and anyone in the pictures. A selection of photographs submitted will be used in publicity materials to celebrate the anniversary next year. That's going to be really interesting because it will show a lot of the changes to the museum, of course, during the years. The new roof, the loss of one of the turntables, the addition of the workshop, and then the removal of the workshop. So there's lots of things of context for pictures there. We'll have to see what happens.
Yeah. Do you know, it's funny, I hadn't realised it was 1975. So I think my first visit to it was something like 77. So I hadn't realised it had only been open at that point a very short period of time. So wow.
John Coyley, of course, was the first keeper. It's had various titles as the head of the museum, director and head, but John was the keeper.
Is that
very
right?
fine railway photographer was John Coyley. He took a superb picture, including one that sticks in my mind of the very last slip coach working, I think at Banbury. But there you go. And sadly, that is all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening. As usual, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already on YouTube, please subscribe. It really does help, does that? And if you really want to support us, find out about membership on YouTube or Patreon, for which there's all sorts of goodies, exclusive and all sorts of stuff, but the show itself will always be free. So most importantly, join us again next week. But until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Thanks for coming along with us.